Thank
you, Mr. Goodale. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. Additional round of question may be called after all members have been recognized. To start, I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Luttrell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Ms. Denbo, in your opening remarks, if I picked up correctly, the United States government is at fault for. Can you elaborate or expand on that statement, just so I know exactly where we're sitting today?
Yes, sir. So the Department of Homeland Security Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards is implemented by, at this point, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency. When CFATS, the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards, was first released, those companies that held large quantities of chemicals, which are considered chemicals of interest, Appendix A, had to submit top screen analyses, and in addition to that, security vulnerability assessments, as well as other sensitive information about their operations, chemical quantities, where they're located, how they are used, and whatnot. The database that contains that information was breached last year in so many ways, and other than the fact that it was very disturbing that owner-operators learned about that breach months later through the media rather than through the government, we recently were informed that though there has been no demonstration or evidence that information was exfiltrated from the database, that the database was accessed for 3 days, which means that there is every opportunity that screenshots or other ways that information, sensitive operational information of our chemicals from across the United States were accessible. And so this is where I say the government is trying very hard to get a better handle on what needs to be secured. And I will say, let me step back and say, the CFATS program has been phenomenal. They have done a great job in improving our nation's chemical security. But this goes to the part of protecting the sensitive information. And it seems every government entity and the sister entities all want to have access to operations sensitive information for one form or another, and thought needs to be given to how that is going to be protected, and there needs to be a transparency with the owner-operator of the information if that information is compromised in any way.
Communication is always a huge deal when you're dealing with siloed entities. Case in point, SMEs across the board are very closed off. I think the ability for us to operate between the seams, if you will, in order to communicate properly if we had an attack, or sharing information back and forth with each other on, hey, this is the inevitable result of the attack, don't let this happen to you, is, I think, something that we're inevitably working on daily around here, and everybody's so close hold with their data information, whether or not it's retrospective, prospective, aggregated data, where it lives and breathes. I'll never vouch for, well, I'm going to be careful how I say this. I don't think anybody's completely protected from any sort of attack whatsoever where we sit today. But thank you for clarification on that. So sector-specific data or cyber insurance, and I'm going to toss this one out to the bunch. Anybody grab a hold of it if you want to. If we want a public-private and a government relationship, and the government to come in and backfill when necessary, if necessary, what does that look like? Because when we're talking about cybersecurity and cyberspace, inevitably a cyber attack can be a grid hit, it can be a agricultural hit, or it can, inevitably it can be life or death. So how, on this committee, how do we're on the receiving end of this, we're all ears here, okay, because you're the subject matter experts. But if we're going to play this out, and believe me, I got to pay insurance bills all the time, but it's very laid out specifically on, hey, here's what it is, and here's how we're going to do this. But in the metaverse, in the cyberspace, risk and threat, it changes every half second of every minute of every hour of every day. How do we build the proper foundation and move forward so we on this committee and the House can understand that and then provide the support needed? And I'm tossing that out to the group.
I'm happy to jump on that. So it's got to be done collaboratively with industry. there's a lot of different elements to it. Number one, industry doesn't speak with one voice. There's going to be all sorts of insurance voices and opinions given on it. I think that there's going to be some very crucial elements, like for the cyber incident, that it shouldn't have a requirement of attribution by the federal government, so it's too hard. I think it should be determined by impact, and that's the overall size of the loss. I think that that impact is going to either be set on a percentage level of losses of 300% of an insurer's book, or perhaps a fixed dollar number, but that's going to be a conversation back and forth. We submitted a response to an RFI where we threw out a suggested number where negotiations could begin, and we put it around the 1 in 250-year event. When I say we, I mean my company, Marsh McLennan. Put it around the overall impact of a 250-year event to just show the magnitude that would have to be for the federal backstop to kick in. I think it should be voluntary because I don't think that every insurance company is necessarily going to want to participate, and that's a key distinction from TRIA, that TRIA responded to a very specific problem, and we're talking about building resilience here proactively, and I think that it shouldn't be compulsory to force companies into it, but I think there's a lot of interest out there. And my last point I think I would address is that trying to do the entire industry at one time might be just too big of a bit to chew. So I would approach sector specifics, and I think the energy sector is a perfect one where you have a very cohesive sector that interact with one another, who are already very highly regulated.
If we do start with that, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, for going over, if we do start with that, in the energy sector, I'm not going to say I disagree or agree with you. Remember, we represent 800,000 people with hundreds of thousands of companies across the nation. There's going to be somebody that's going to argue with that statement.
That's
so
fine.
imagine what, on the receiving end up here, we got to wade through all this. So it's going to be the collective group coming together for a stepping off point. But I'm sorry to close you off, sir. I'm 2 minutes over, Mr. Chairman. I apologize. Thank you, sir.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the ranking member, Mrs. Swallow, for 5 minutes of question.
Mr. Luttrell, do you want some time?
Mine, sir? Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, please, sir. You continue with your closing.
I would just say for those sectors that are going to come back and say, I don't understand why they're first, I would say all are welcome at the table. I'm just naming a sector that I think it particularly fits for, but if financial institutions come forward and say, that's as important it is for us that it is for them, by all means, those discussions.
This is where the, and I hate to say the masses, but this is where the independent agencies and companies are going to have to come together and really position themselves in order to address the government on the way forward. And I may be speaking out of turn here, but if you just can kind of play out everything that happens in the continental United States that we're talking about here, which every single, I mean, think about it. Everybody has an iPhone in their pocket. Everything is digital today. Everything is touched by the cyberspace. So if this is something that we really want to expand on, which we do, we wouldn't be having this hearing for otherwise. You're going to have to help us.
We are here to help.
Okay. Thank you, ranking member.
Yeah.
Mrs. Swalwell?
Mr.